You know, it's always good just every once in a while you have somebody that just tells the truth, doesn't make any excuses about anything. Watch this very short video to see what I'm talking about.
Do you hear me? I'm quaky, I'm tired, I worked hard at school. Okay?
All right, so what? You don't want me to mess with you tonight?
No, I'm quaky, I'm tired, I worked hard at school. What
You're not going to wrestle here in a little bit?
Well, maybe.
Oh.
If I stop getting cranky and tired.
I got to stop being cranky and tired. you know, all of us have had those days, those bad days when it just doesn't seem to go our way. Maybe it doesn't last the whole day, but we just have those times when things just aren't going. But if you're a sports fanatic, if you have a favorite team, you know how quickly that changes. You know, a good day to a bad day and vice versa. Went to the basketball game, the girls' game last night over at Beargrass, and just where we were sitting, it was kind of right on the line with where other team fans were sitting. So I was sitting right beside a guy in the stands, and his daughter was playing. And, of course, the referees made no good calls at all. But we talked through the whole game. And at the end, Beargrass won. And at the end, I said, well, it was nice meeting you. You guys have a good, safe journey back. And I stuck my hand out, and he wouldn't shake my hand. So I called down fire from heaven on him. I don't think it worked. But anyway, it was how quick, that it changed like that. Family can make you lose your mind, amen? Everything's good, everything's going along good, and then something can happen, it just makes it a bad day. Traffic, parking lots. It was just so funny. It was like a week ago, Janice and I are at Walmart, and we're backing out, and I look, as I backed out, saw in the rearview mirror, walking up with Kurt and Jenny Honican, preacher out at Crossroads, and they're walking up, and I was hoping he wouldn't recognize our car. So as they were walking up, I just kept moving over further and further as driving. So, I'm watching them, and they just kept scooting over. So finally, I had them just pinched again, and they turn and go down between cars. And so I'm looking out, and Kurt's just going. So we pull around. I was rolling my window down. I said, hey, Kurt. And he says, I was thinking, how much room does this dummy need? But, how quick it can change when those things happen. And we know what those days are. But we also know that there's a huge difference between a bad day and a storm. Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41 says this. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was, in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? In verse 41, they were terrified and asked each other, Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. You know when you're in a storm. Bad days irritate you. Storms can terrify you. Storms can alter your life. Bad days are here and then gone, and something you're laughing about shortly. Storms, you just have to endure. And we're in our third week of our series that we're calling Yes, Following Jesus. And what we're doing is we're trying to look in this series in the book of Mark, following the best example that we know, and that's Jesus, of how to live after we say yes to following him. Jesus has a lot to offer us on this very topic, the storms that we face in our life. And it's more than a pep talk. It's more than a coffee cup mug saying. It's real advice. It's real following of how to find the calm in the chaos of the storm of life. So we're just going to dive right in. And in those first two verses, when we read verses 35 and 36, we see that at the end of a long day, that's the way it talks, end of a long day, Jesus teaching and preaching and performing miracles, he just says, I want to go to the other side of the lake, and they get in the boat to go. Well, at least 5 of the 12 disciples have fishing experience. They know the lake. They know what it's about. But all of them also knew the region. Jesus wanted them to leave the safety of one side where it was a Jewish audience to go to the other side where it was not a Jewish audience. So we would kind of look at it like, why are we leaving something good to go to the bad part of town? But Jesus says that's where he wants to go. Didn't seem like a good idea, but the disciples trust him in that. As you keep going, you see in verse 36, he reveals that they did an important thing. Now, don't overlook this. They got in the boat. They just simply got in the boat. The Greek word here is that they got in the boat and left the crowds. Is an idea of they surrendered. They let go of what was on this side, let go to get in the boat so they would go where Jesus said. It's that idea of that. And it sounds simple, but to go, you first have to leave. And they were willing to leave behind what was there. So that's kind of the first thing we want to kind of point out here is that in following Jesus, say yes to the invitation. Plenty of people like the things that come along with Jesus. All the good things is from following Jesus, but it's not as many who are willing to go with Jesus, to let go, to go where he is. Follow him when all you have at that point in your life is just trust. You don't have anything else but to trust him as you move forward. To follow him when you know it's going to take work and it's going to take sacrifice. To follow him when you know it's going to get uncomfortable to do that. I want to notice two things here. There were other boats. It says that other boats went with him. So it wasn't just the 12 who got into boats. It was other people. Now what's interesting to me is this is the only mention of those boats. It doesn't tell that they reached the other side. It doesn't tell that they turned and came out. It just mentions them no more. So we're kind of left to think about, did the storm turn them back and they went back? Or did they stay with Jesus all the way to the other side and it's just not mentioned? We're just left with that. So I just think that's interesting. The second thing is this leaving the crowd. Crowd is not just a description of people. Crowd is a mentality. You've heard it mentioned, the crowd mentality. A crowd changes everything about the situation. It's harder to step away from a crowd, to step out of the crowd, be the only one. It's harder to do that. To oppose a crowd, it's difficult to do. The crowd mentally affects us emotionally. It can affect us spiritually. It can affect us physically. Where do you think the term mean girls comes from? And I see some of the young girls smiling. It's not just one, it's a group. And it has that mentality of it. You ever been on jury duty? I'm not just saying being there, I'm saying be on a trial and you go back to that jury room. You think you're going to stand up and be big and bad and stand for justice. When everybody else, or 8 of the 12, vote against you, you go, ooh, maybe I'm wrong. No, it's hard to step out and do that. You ever seen, you know what happens when they storm the court in a basketball game? They storm the court. It's a crowd. When one person storms the court, they get arrested for streaking. You know, they don't arrest the crowd, they arrest the one. So there's a crowd mentality. Exodus 23 verse 2 says this, "Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd." All the way back in Exodus, talking about how they're going to handle justice. He said, don't follow the crowd. You stand for what's right. The crowd keeps us from doing the right things and many times causes us to do the wrong things. The crowd mentality lessens our responsibility to do right. You know what I mean? When no one else steps out, we don't think it's necessarily our responsibility. It's absorbed in the crowd. That's a good Bible study for you if you're looking for something to study this afternoon, tonight, tomorrow. Is just look up all the places that crowd is through the Bible and see how it affected people. As you move on in verses 37 and 38, it says a furious squall. It was sudden. That means it was sudden and violent. And this was common for the Sea of Galilee, by the geographical nature, very common for sudden storms to come up. And they mirror how storms are in our lives. They're sudden, they're violent. You may have been in a marriage, and just for a long time, things just didn't seem right, and they go unattended, and then just boom, one day, I want a divorce. It just comes on you. Could be that you've drank alcohol for 20 years, and you said, I've always been able to control it, and all of a sudden you've come to that point, you go, alcohol's controlling me. Boom, I've got a problem. Your health. Maybe you've ignored your health for years and lived a certain lifestyle, and you go, and all of a sudden the doctor says you got this big problem. Boom, it's a storm. Financially, you live beyond your means, and things go on for years, and you think things will get better, and then all of a sudden one thing happens and one excuse, and you just can't make it. Boom. Many of life's storms build for years and then just happen, and other times they come in a blink of an eye. And we'll go on, we see in verse 38, it's one of the most common reactions when we go into a storm of our life. We don't think God cares. God, is this how you treat a faithful follower? I raised my whole family in the church. I've been here every Sunday, put money in the offering plate, faithful, and this is what I get in the end. The sickness, my husband, my wife, they get sick, and we question to God, does God care? And that's a huge mistake. Then the storm to begin to doubt God cares. Simon Peter said it, cast all your cares on him because he cares for you. Jesus himself said, look at the birds of the air. As a paraphrase, but look at the birds. They're well fed and taken care of. Don't you know he cares more for you? The psalmist wrote and said, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He's there. That's what we see when we get in the boat, that Jesus is right there in the storms. So when we say yes to accepting the invitation, we're also saying yes to trusting Jesus once we get in the boat. You see in these verses here, Jesus turns to the winds and waves and brings calmness in the midst of all this chaos. Isn't that what we want? When we get into that storm of life, no matter what it is, we just want it to go away. We want the wind and the waves to stop. We want the doctor to give us that good news. We want everything to work out. We want to get that job. We want to just stop it, Lord. That's all we want. And that's what I want. But I have to trust God that in the storm, he knows what he's doing and I'm not. And I don't. I'm just along for the ride. The disciples saw one storm, the wind and the waves. Jesus saw two storms. First, he took care of the wind and the waves, and then he addressed the storm that was going on in their lives, their lack of faith. So he turns to them and wants to deal with that. It's more important than the wind and the waves. This might be a phrase that you want to write down, or maybe it means something to you like it did me that I read this week. Sometimes God will calm the storm. Every time, God will use the storm. Every time, God will use the storm. That's what, as you're thinking about this, just listen to some of these verses. James said, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Paul said it just a little bit different in Romans 5. He said, we glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character, hope, and hope does not disappoint us. What are these writers saying? They're saying every time God will use the storm. It's our job just to, in the storm, to bail some water, to wipe the rain out of our eyes, and trust Him to get us through the storm. Well, there's a third yes that just naturally flows from that, is that when you say yes in the storm, you're going to see Jesus differently. You're just going to see another side of Jesus. They had heard Jesus teach, seen Him perform miracles, but this was different. They saw Jesus control all of nature in one voice, in one command. This was a moment when they began to understand Jesus was something different. They saw something, another side of Him. Circumstances allow us to see things differently. Have you understood people or seen another side of people once you get into a storm? Once you get into a situation where there's pressure, you see people in a different light, don't you? That you didn't see, you couldn't see before. This was some of you might know this story. Years ago, Janice and I went out to eat, and she left her pocketbook. Went back to get it, and it was gone. And so we asked around where it is, and nobody asked the workers, they hadn't seen anything. So we go back to the restaurant, and we're actually at this point going down to the dumpster to look and see if we can just at least find her pocketbook. We figured they've already stole everything. And as we're down there, I look up through the line of cars, and I see a worker walking out carrying a pocketbook under her arm. I said, Janice, I think that lady's got your pocketbook. And I go running up there, and she's putting something in the back seat, the floorboard, and I go, hey, what's that you got there? And before she could do anything, Janice pushes me out of the way, grabs the pocketbook out of her hand, and says, that's my pocketbook. And I went, oh, snap. You know, I didn't know that side, you know. You get into circumstances, you get into pressure situations, you see things differently. And Jesus here, the disciples got to see a side of Jesus they had not seen. They had not seen this. Saying yes to Jesus, you see Jesus on a deeper level. When He calmed the storm, it says they continued across the sea. They landed on the other shore. Now remember, this is all taking place at night. They land on the other shore. As soon as they get out, a demon-possessed man meets them on the shore. And he begins to shout at Jesus because the demons, they recognize who Jesus is. And it says this man was totally out of control. He was possessed by multiple demons, that he had superhuman strength. They said they'd try to chain him, and he'd just break the chains. He lived among the tombs. His family couldn't be near him. He cut himself with rocks. Just totally miserable life. And Jesus cast the demons out. Remember, that's where they went into the herd of pigs, and they ran down the cliff and drowned in the ocean. Jesus crossed a lake to set a man free. To set a man free. It was worth rowing across in a storm and then going back to set one man free. You know what Jesus did after that? I would think, you'd set up tents and have a revival and everything in this land. When Jesus did, He got back in the boat. They got back in the boat and went back to the other side. Saying yes to Jesus, you get to see Him in a whole different light, that the lengths He would go to help a person, to set a person free. And in the midst of that, we will find our own purpose in life. Let me show you what I mean. In Mark chapter 5, the very next chapter, and when it tells this story that I was just telling you, it says this: as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him go, but said, go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Verse 20, so the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis. And Decapolis just means 10 cities. It's an area, a region. How much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed. Did he have any success going back? This once demon-possessed man go back to the Decapolis, this large area. Did he have any success? It doesn't tell us directly, but if you read over 2 chapters later in Mark, Jesus goes back to this region. And it says when he arrived there, they welcomed him with open arms. He was able to heal many, to teach, to preach. Was it because this once demon-possessed man prepared the way? I like to think so. 2 centuries later, in the 2nd century, the Bible doesn't tell us, but history tells us in that very region was a strong concentration of Christians. Can we trace it back to one man? I don't know, but it's possible. It's very possible. You see, when we say yes, get in the boat. And then once we get in that boat, if we'll trust him all the way to the other side, we'll see Jesus like we've never seen him before. And you'll find yourself and what he wants you to do in the meantime. Say yes to following Jesus.